Walawani. Hopefully you guys are starting to roll in. I can't believe it. It's our last webinar of the series. It's been 6 weeks that have just gone so fast. Happy NAIDOC week, everybody. So it'd be great if you just want to put in the comments, you know, what you've been up to this week, if you've gone to any celebrations. I know myself, it's been a really quiet year for me, so it'd be good to see what everyone else is doing across the state and the nation if you're tuning in from further on. We've got a great lineup again today. Like I said, it's our last week, so make sure that you get in and ask those important questions that maybe you've been holding back and need answering. Jamaga Mujbaraga, so welcome friends. This is the last one of the series, which has been named Jamaga Ganyi, We Talk Good Fire. We've got our panelists that are on every week. We've got our lovely Dean Tech Guide, Tech Guru as he calls himself, and he's wearing a lovely shirt today. So for those of you who have purchased shirts to support Firesticks, you should be receiving them by now. I received mine today, so I've got mine on as well. We have the lovely Monica from Treading Lightly there as well. We have Uncle Nook, Noel Webster, of course. He's such an inspiring leader in the Aboriginal community down here, a very powerful UN elder and man, just a driving force in traditional fire management and my hero. Definitely look up to Uncle Nook. We have 2 guest presenters tonight. We have Ollie Costello, who is the co-founder of Firestick. So he's going to be one to listen into today and definitely line up those questions for Ollie. And then we have Chris Andrew, who is the general manager of Black Duck Foods further down the south coast. He's doing some wonderful things there with bringing back native foods. Yep, Uncle Nook's just come back into the picture. Yeah, there's not really much housekeeping. We've done that every week, so just make sure you put your comments in there as well. And as Monica mentions every week, if you miss any of the webinars, they're on the Treading Lightly Facebook page. So jump across and catch up on all the ones that you've missed. So this week's theme is, where do we go from here? And I think that's a question on everyone's lips at the moment. Is there's so much energy that's going towards traditional fire management and bringing that back. Where do we go? How do we start? And how do we approach it respectfully? So without further ado, I just want to hand it over to Ollie Costello.
Thanks, Lee. First, I'd just like to start by acknowledging country. I'm a Bundjalung man on Bundjalung country, but also just like to acknowledge where all the listeners are, everyone is. And also big thanks to Lee for the beautiful shirt. Yeah, mine arrived this week as well. So yeah, very special
You're welcome.
Have it on.
And thanks for that acknowledgement. I usually do it every week, and this week I've forgotten on NAIDOC week. I'm going to get smacked for that.
I didn't even notice. and thanks to like Treading Lightly and Southeast Local Land Services and Nook and everybody for helping to pull these webinars together. I've been hearing great feedback, and yeah, it's a great series that you guys have put on. So I guess, yeah, before we talk about where to, I guess, how did we get here? And so I'll just give a little bit of a backstory to how I got here and talk a little bit about Firesticks and maybe the journey ahead. So, you know, I was born and grew up in Bundjalung country, and, you know, if you can see, it's quite green in the background here, and we don't see a lot of fire in these areas that I grew up around, Clunes, Lismore, Byron, Rosebank. So I didn't learn heaps about fire when I was growing up. You know, I sort of learnt more about rainforest country and, you know, like spent a lot of time in the rivers and the creeks and kind of that kind of story. And it wasn't really in other than sort of like fire as a, you know, like for ceremony and for, you know, food and light and all that sort of fire cultural contexts in a community sort of social setting, you know, but yeah, not in the landscape. And then after I left school, I moved to the Blue Mountains, and, you know, I'd seen the news and, you know, I knew a little bit about fire, but never really been kind of like threatened by it, you know, never really been concerned. And so I remember, you know, one of those, can't remember what it was, but in the early 2000s, you know, there was some big fires in the Blue Mountains, and I started thinking a lot about fire in the landscape, and also like started thinking about, you know, like in the Blue Mountains, you know, there's like 1 million hectares of national parks on either side of the ridge that runs to the west there, and so you've got these kind of huge landscapes that carry a lot of fire, and traditionally would have been, you know, really important landscapes as, you know, like huge galleries of rock art and engraving and, you know, like abundance of resources that are out there. And I started thinking about, you know, like how would old people have been managing fire, and, you know, and also what, you know, like when you've got all this bush around you, you start thinking about what can you do to protect your home. And so, you know, there's probably almost 20 years ago, I was thinking about that stuff. You know, I didn't know much, you know, didn't have any sort of real answers other than sort of it'd be good to, you know, like get some Aboriginal teams together and start to do some, like, you know, vegetation management and some burning, but I didn't really know how to do it or what it all meant. And then a few years later, my mother, she took off to Arnhem Land and came back with this old man, Billy Yalawanga, and he was involved in some of that early sort of revival sort of around the Savannah burning and the carbon abatement stuff, so the Walfer project. And he paints that brown falcon. There's, you know, you see it, it's in Jeremy Russell Smith's book, I can't remember what it's called, but you see it around. It's this, you know, brown falcon comes down and picks up a stick and carries fire, and, you know, and yeah, so he was a, you know, like a old lawman, and, you know, he had all this knowledge of country, and, you know, and where he grew up, which is in that West Arnhem Plateau, that sandstone escarpment. And when he came to the mountains, like it was way too cold for him, and he didn't sort of like that. But he had that ability to read country, and go out and make spears and collect stuff, and, you know, knew things about country, you know, that you know, from his ability from learning in his own landscape, and he could transfer that knowledge. And the old man was, like, you know, quite inspiring to me at the time. I was pretty was in a bit of a low point or a bit of a transition sort of to nowhere, and sort of inspired me to think about how do you restore that practice in landscapes? How do you connect? And, you know, he was saying the same thing, like he'd moved off country, he grew up on country, and he'd, you know, gone off and done art and, you know, like cultural stuff, and sort of traveled around the world, and, you know, and wasn't spending time in one of the most remote parts of Arnhem Land, in the parts of the world, wasn't spending that time on country, looking after his country. There's a film called Looking After Yamini, which he's a key part of, which is from the 70s or the 80s. And anyway, I'm digressing. But so there's that kind of like that seed that got planted around how do you do that? You know, how do you get back into landscapes and, you know, and maintain livelihoods, protect country, you know? And so an old man wanted us to come up there and sort of support doing things up there. And so it inspired me. And then old man went back up there, and he passed away, sadly, and my mother's passed away. So that kind of left a bit of a mark on me about that loss of knowledge as well, you know, and that knowledge exchange that, you know, hasn't really occurred to the next generation, even in my family and my extended family, like that. Just because people aren't on country, they're not practicing, they're not learning. And so they were kind of key things that, you know, emerged for me. And I had no way to really apply myself, you know. I was like filleting a fish, digging ditches, you know, like couch surfing, that kind of thing. And I sort of, you know, started getting my head together and my life together a bit. And eventually, I'll try and cut, I went into that pretty deep. Eventually ended up at university, and I was doing adult education community management. And I didn't even, so I just sort of landed in it, and then started thinking about the power of that kind of, how do we build organisations and community structures and educate people to build empowerment and transformation, you know. And so in those projects, I was doing stuff about, you know, cultural land management and fire, and, you know, like community building and all that sort of stuff. And I got a bit inspired, and I ended up getting quite connected in the, you know, Aboriginal student network and things like that. And my friend Sheena Watt, who recently was elected to Victorian Parliament, encouraged me to do a leadership program, Centre for Sustainable Leadership program. So I enrolled in that. And Jason DeSantola at UTS was like, you know, a bit of a mentor there and a bro, and sort of pulled me into this research project that was looking at Land Alive, which was a state government program at the time, looking at supporting land management. And then the first day I went out on country on this project, I met Victor Stephenson, and he was straight away talking about reading country and applying fire, and it really was super inspiring for me. And so I end up, you know, working with Victor around, and Jacqueline Goff and Jason and Clem Gromit, who was the project team at the time, you know, developed this little pilot project called Firesticks, which is really a scoping exercise at the time about what was happening in sort of mainly New South Wales. And through that initial project, started building a bit of a community of practice. I ended up got a job at National Parks, and so I could progress that kind of story with National Parks. And over time, Firesticks has grown to this very organic process around just connecting people and trying to inspire that kind of understanding around the knowledge that we have, and how do we build that knowledge, and how do we connect with other people to share that knowledge. And so, you know, through working with Victor and Peter Marie Stanley, started going to the Cape York fire workshops, which, you know, and at the time, you know, I went to the first one I went to, which is one of the first ones that had people outside of Cape York. We brought some people from New South Wales up there, and then over time, you know, there was a strong movement of people that wanted to go and be on country and see fire in practice, because at the time in New South Wales, you couldn't really participate in cultural burning activities unless they were highly regulated. So, you know, like national parks and RFS were pretty much running hazard reduction burning programs and would have some Aboriginal people involved in the planning or the implementation or what, but it wasn't an Indigenous-led process. And the application of fire was often quite conventional, and you couldn't really see that kind of, you know, more traditional application of fire. So being able to kind of, you know, be immersed in that activity up in Cape York was really empowering, and you could just see the potential of that. But then we sort of had this issue where people were like, oh, that's Cape York, it's not New South Wales or Victoria or whatever, different landscapes. And they are very different landscapes. And it's not about the direct application of knowledge from one place to another. It's about transferring knowledge, about understanding that application of knowledge. And I'd like to acknowledge, you know, Victor Stephenson and all his work, and particularly Dr. Tommy George and George Musgrave for their leadership and mentorship to build that sort of story out of Cape York, to really help build you know, this journey that we're all on. And so many other elders and communities as well, for generations of practice all over the country, have been able to maintain these practices, you know, and it's only been the last, you know, few hundred years that we've seen this decline. So it's so important that we understand that responsibility that we have and how we can take on that responsibility and go forward. So, you know, so now, you know, in the last couple of years, Firesticks has emerged into the Firestick Alliance. So a couple of years ago, we incorporated, leading up to the Bundanon National Indigenous Fire Workshop in the Shoalhaven there. And that was a really important kind of moment to be able to sort of, what was a very organic community kind of process, start to formalise it. It's been a pretty challenging and rocky road through that process, but it's important to sort of build some mechanisms that can empower, because we talk about Indigenous leadership and we want to maintain cultural practices, but we also live in a modern kind of world that's heavily constrained by resources and risk and liability. And, you know, so being able to kind of, you know, have an organisation that can hold the space and advocate for community interests and help build a collective vision has been really important. And so that's really what the Alliance has been doing over the last couple of years, through the hosting of the National Indigenous Fire Workshops, through other training and mentoring activities and advocacy work. It's, you know, it's a collective of individuals that are working towards a common good. And we're really grateful for all the support that's been offered. You know, like the last bushfire season was, you know, traumatic. And, you know, like we'd only just really got the Alliance up and running, and we were sort of working on strategy and a plan and how to, like, how do we build this organisation and all these amazing opportunities all around us. And then the bushfires hit, and it just really, blew up, I guess, in a way, in a good and a bad way. It's great to have people interested and people paying attention, but we're not telling a different story. It's just that people are, there's more people listening. And I think a lot of that groundwork that we did over the last, 10 or, Fitz has been doing it for decades now. I've been doing it for about 10 years or so. That groundwork really helped to just launch Firesticks into this space. And so really grateful for all the support from, landholders and communities and donors. It's been a pretty powerful journey, but it's also taken its toll as well. Like there's so much work that needs to be done in communities, building our capacity and being able to kind of really, like set a collective vision. And we've sort of been thrown into this kind of like solving other people's problems, like we didn't create all these problems. Our old people worked for generations and centuries to manage these landscapes and shape these landscapes in ways that provided really important, productive resources that I think Chris will talk a bit about, and really important like connections to country that we have through our lineage, from both sides of our families and through our connections through these landscapes. We have these relationships to country, to places, plants, animals, and fire is not the only thing. It is a part of a broader cultural land management framework, cultural practice framework. But fire is one of those really powerful parts of that story because fire can destroy and create, and it's one of the most, it's what's driving, our economies, combustion engines and technology and climate change, that carbon exchange and the life forces that exist around fire are, intrinsically connected to the life cycles of the universe, and they're intrinsically connected to us as humans. That's how we started to form our social identities, by gathering around fires, by being able to share food and light. And so much of our modern human practices have been shaped by fire in a social setting, and in a cultural landscape setting, fire is what shapes the landscape. So it's so important that we're in this position to help guide that journey forward, but we're being asked to solve all these problems that didn't really need to occur. So lots of invasive species, weeds, pests that have fire relationships that can be positive or negative. It's really important. The risk management issues, like we've seen, like there's no doubt in my mind that climate change, was a massive driver for the extreme conditions that these fires rip through these landscapes. But it was also off the back of a drought, which was probably largely climate driven as well. But the landscape health was so poor, and we've been saying this for some time, like I've been for a lot of those landscapes that were devastated, and I knew that they were at extreme risk of extreme wildfire because they were so unhealthy. The kinship of those landscapes was, they'd been burnt either through a lack of appropriate fire or an overabundance of fire. Or too hot fires. They've been burnt or not burnt in the wrong ways for a long time, and they've become really unhealthy for that. And we've got to tackle climate change. We need to address the drivers of that, but we've got to manage our country properly. And as First Nations people, that's our gift, that's our opportunity to actually get into these landscapes, reconnect to them, understand our story, our kinship to place, and manage them. And it's not just about applying fire or killing weeds or pest management. It's about being on country with our old people, our young people, gathering together, camping, hunting, fishing, collecting, spreading that relationship across the landscape, because that's where our power comes from as people. That's where our power has always been as First Nations people, is our ability to understand our responsibility to country and to connect with each other so that other people understand our responsibility to country, so that when they are with us on country, they respect those laws and practices of that country. And so that maintains the health of landscapes across, all of the country. And it means that we understand our roles and responsibilities to each other, which helps to build the functional governance that's required for societies to live in the best way they can in the landscape. And so this is the opportunity that fire gives us. It gives us not only a way of being able to manage fuel and biodiversity, it gives us a way of being able to understand our roles and responsibilities to country and create opportunities for change in the way we drive our social settings, our politics, our economy. This is, people might see it as an abstract thing, but if you think about it, if you understand it from the point of view that what impact does fire have on this species, and then you have a whole heap of species as a collective that it make up a country type or an ecosystem, and you understand how fire is relating to them, if you can understand that impact that we're having, then you can understand, how do we manage that impact? And then how do we organize ourselves in a way that makes that a productive relationship so that we can increase the abundance or the growth of that system without, taking too much out of it. And that's what we see from modern economies and political systems, is they tend to be very extractive of knowledge, of resources, of people's relationships. And that's the challenge that we have. And, I'm not perfect, and, we're not all perfect, but if we all work collectively around those challenges, we can help support each other to be more resilient and more capable of being able to deal with new challenges like we're seeing now. Because a lot of the issues that we're having now are actually old challenges that we can solve and we've got solutions for. But more and more we're seeing new challenges. And that's where we need to have our energy and our focus, being able to go, this is a new problem, being able to identify it. Things like, new weeds and climate-induced impacts. So not just weather, but the changes in seasons and a whole heap of different behaviours that are going to make places and species much more vulnerable. And we've got, a whole heap of other pressures as well around, economic pressures and a whole heap of things that are always changing. So it's really important that we understand the opportunities that we have. But you need to be able to assess them. And that's another thing that fire teaches. It teaches us how to, read the country, assess those opportunities, and to be able to respond. So it's an adaptive process. It's not a static, linear kind of model that we're seeing around us with quite, well-intended fire management regimes. Like, I've got much respect for the interests of the organisations, land managers, agencies like the volunteers fighting the fires. Everybody's, I think, trying to do the right thing, but the systems that have been created to manage fire in the landscape are, they're very linear. They're very static in the sense that, we're responding often too late and in the wrong way. We're not actually dealing with the issue of what's driving that impact. And that's where we need to go. And I think everybody wants to get there too. Like, that's the feedback that I get when I talk to volunteers and land managers and agencies. Is like, we all want to go in the same direction. It's really just about building an empowering framework for us to do that. And that's where we are now. And I think that's the story for the future. Is we've seen what happens when you break law on country. We've seen the deterioration of our landscapes over centuries now. We've seen the devastation of country. And now we can heal together. We can understand that there is a journey ahead. And it's not an uncharted journey. It's a journey that old people have been walking for millennia. It's really about how we walk together now and how we share the power and the resources and create the settings that are going to make these things happen. Because, like, there's a lot of good talk at the moment, but what do we do next season or this season? And we need to be thinking centuries and generations ahead. Like, we need to build the fire management and the cultural land management frameworks for the future. And we need to bring the knowledge that we had from the past to now and walk together as a very clear kind of vision around what's important to us, because, if we don't, we're going to see more high intensity wildfires devastating our plants, animals, our economy, our lives and property. We're going to see more other impacts, across these landscapes, from pandemics, from droughts, from, all sorts of other, causes. So it's so important that we can collectively build resilience and work together going forward. So I feel like I've lost my notes, but I think that's probably enough for me for now. But I just think it's so important that we learn from country, and it's so important that we support each other going forward. So thanks for the opportunity to come along and share and be a part of tonight's seminar.
Thanks, Ollie, and well said. Lots of knowledge there. I could listen to you all night. I just looked at the time and I was like, oh my gosh, we're halfway through already, and I feel like I've got a ton of questions, and I'm sure other people do as well. make sure you put your questions in and we'll get to them at the end, I promise. I like what you said about providing meaningful work for mob. You know, it's not just about burning country for weed management or to reduce fuel loads. It really is meaningful. And the girls a few weeks ago were talking about blood memory and how blood memory connects us to our ancestry, a memory that we have that's been passed on from generations to generations. And, you know, the work they're doing to try and uncover what that happens to a person when they're taken, when that role's taken from them. Yeah, so, yeah, I think that's a really important point, is why aren't we looking at this as a way of healing people as well as country? You know, it seems so simple that if we put the people back into meaningful jobs, the outcomes are going to be enormous. And I think that's what we're going to see in the future, is country healing as well as our people, and then we're moving forward together with the wider community, because like you said, we can't do this alone. It's something that we need to walk together respectfully. And Uncle Nook says it all the time, that we're all custodians of this land now. We all have that kind of responsibility to care for country. Yeah, so thanks so much for your time, Ollie. It was really nice listening to you. And I'm sure, does any of the panelists have any questions that they want to give to Ollie before we move on? Is there anything you want to add, Nook? No?
I might just say, Ollie, thank you for coming on, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to share Firesticks as well through our Treading Lightly channel, because I can see a very close parallel to what our intentions were for Treading Lightly some 5 years ago, and then we became incorporated just before the fires as well. And I can really relate to how much that has, you know, either changed or put a fair bit of pressure, which is not bad pressure, it's good, but still trying to manage that. So I think that's something that I'm seeing coming through, a lot of questions and people wanting to get involved in Firesticks and have Firesticks come and do, you know, different, you know, either cool burns or smoke ceremonies and all sorts of things for healing on their land. And really important that everybody can be really patient, I guess, at the moment with that process, and trust that everything will unfold as it's meant to. So, yeah, I just wanted to make note of that. Yeah,
I'd just like to apologise for all the people that, you know, have all these things they want us to do that we haven't been able to do. You know, and that's what I was saying before. Like, it's, you know, there's just so much interest, you know, and you know, we've got hundreds of landholders and, you know, communities that want us to come and burn. And for us, it's like, it's about local people's power, and, you know, like, local people are the ones that need to be, you know, leading this work. And there just hasn't been any support to build the frameworks for, you know, centuries in these landscapes. And so there's just so much work that needs to be done to build that long-term framework. And that's what we're really committed to. And I didn't go into detail, but for me, building a really, really key element is the training and mentoring program. And that's a lot of work we've been doing around workshops and you know, and connecting people. So really driving that kind of, but it's really about empowering people to be connected to country and to be able to have the support, the mentorship and connection, so they can draw from wherever they need to, you know, like themselves, the land, the elders, even Firesticks practitioners, or you know, other agencies or scientists, whoever they need that support from, building a framework around it. And then that's you know, as a whole process. But I think really importantly is that we need regional programs that can really strengthen the delivery and the implementation, so that when a landholder, you know, says, oh, I want to, you know, can you come and look after my land? You know, maybe they can pay, maybe they can't, but they know who they can talk to, and that person can coordinate across the region with the practitioners and other agencies and say, okay, this is the pathway, this is how it's going to be resourced. You know, we might need to find money, there might be money already there to do it. These things cost money. And being able to then kind of like run programs over, you know, long term, so you can have people with livelihoods that are fully engaged in cultural land management in their landscape, local custodians, so that you can draw the right people together for that work that needs to happen. So you've got local custodianship, and then you've got the expertise from other custodians or other knowledge holders or other agencies that get brought into that delivery. Because particularly for fire, it's really important that you work at scales. So you see, say, for example, with RFS and national parks, whatever, you have all these, brigades all over the state, but in a lot of those brigades, like, they don't see much wildfire, or there's not, like, they might be busy responding to other bits and pieces, but they don't have this significant fire threat every year, but that significant fire threat is somewhere in the landscape, across the state or the country every year. It may be at a small scale, maybe at a large scale. So being able to have that capacity as a region to be able to respond quickly and make sure that you've got the people that understand that landscape, they're culturally connected to it, so that, you can do response, but you can also do, more importantly, the preparation work, that reading country, applying, the right cultural land management activities to keep that country healthy and resilient, so you can respond. I think when we can get some of those regional frameworks up, people will start to see the power of this work and why cultural fire management is so effective at a landscape scale. Not because people think in, like, hazard reduction burning sort of scales, like, oh, if we burn this, we protect that. They don't understand, if you manage the landscape, it changes the behavior of the fire. It doesn't necessarily stop fire, it changes the fire, because a lot of that natural fire is cultural fire. Lightning is our law teacher. It was the first law teacher before any other teacher of fire. Lightning taught that law. And our response to that in the modern context is, fires are bad, let's put it out. It's all about command and control. Humans are superior. And it's like the wrong way for me. It's like, and don't get me wrong, some of those lightning fires that get lit now, you need to put them out because the landscape's so sick, they turn into a mega fire. But when we're managing the landscape the right way, I think that, we have those regimes in place that we'll see that lightning fire as a good thing, because it'll be doing what it does. It'll be teaching us law, like it's always taught law, and it will burn the landscape in a good way where we've been managing the landscape wrong. It'll burn the country in a bad way where we haven't been managing it, and so it's understanding that. And in some areas, a high intensity fire, will be quite destructive. But if it's very localized and there's good resilience within that ecosystem and surrounding ecosystems, it's not such a big drama. We see a lot of vegetation communities that, like particularly like wet sclerophyll's and some of those big euc forests that have over time had quite dramatic fire regimes. You can see the benefits of high intensity fire at a localized level, but when it becomes a whole landscape, you see massive declines and you see massive impacts on people and life and property and animals. And if that's one thing that I always like people to think about, when you look at the scale of some of these wildfires and you understand the cultural landscape that they're in, you can see that almost entire clan and even nation, even language groups, pretty much most of their habitat, the areas that they lived have been burnt out. So in a traditional kind of society, that means that, like, have the people, like, where would they live and how would they survive in that landscape? All their food's gone for weeks, for a couple of weeks, you might be able to, scavenge around at all the, the animals and things that have, been killed. But then there's going to be these huge gaps in resources, and then there's going to be these huge booms in resources. So all over the landscape, you just start to see what was once, or it has been for a long time, a much more regulated landscape that had high productivity and you had good relationships between, different country types. So there was lots of abundance. These huge systems that are just booming and busting, and that creates a huge social strain on people that have to then, go and, stay with other family or, or neighbours or, or even people they don't necessarily get along with so well, because there's nowhere else to go for potentially years at a time. So you can see the kind of impacts that these fires have had. We're just not like, there's no, like in our sort of modern kind of cultural context, of a few hundred or a few thousand years, we just don't see that happening. And we know that the conditions have been there in the past, like climate variability, you know, with climate driving changes being driven very fast at the moment. But there's been points in time in these landscapes where we've had extreme climate changes, you know, where the seas moved, you know, and, you know, we've had mega fires, and there's all sorts of things that have gone on. So we've got to understand that context, and we've got to build that regional capacity and resilience going forward if we want to respond to future challenges.
I will say something. Can you hear me okay? Because this mic's not that great. Look, I can sit there and listen to Ollie for, you know, days on end, and he's been very generous in sharing a lot of information, and he's moulded a fair bit of my learning and my journey and shaped my knowledge. He's only a young fella, but he's had a few milestone birthdays. So, but for me, being an older person, to see sort of like his leadership to shine through, and that's empowering for me. You know, it's one of my words the other week was empowerment, and that's what he provides. You know, within, you know, our practitioners, and that leadership and direction. So me personally, be forever grateful. We've been chatting a bit lately over the phone the last few weeks. You know, like we've been struggling a bit, but to see you up there talking tonight, and now with like, and now you got the hands like moving and following through, and like, yeah, you're on the mend, you're on the way back, and it was just lovely to sit there and see you speak and do that. But we'll catch up over the next couple of days. Yeah, you know, so yeah, look, he's a beautiful person. You know, he's passionate, and the advocacy that he puts there, and shows and puts one. So yeah, look, we love him to death, and we're just so grateful that he's presented. He's created like a pathway for this Indigenous knowledge system to walk across our landscape. So thanks, Ollie.
Thanks, Uncle.
Thanks so much, Ollie, and well said, Nook. Definitely inspiring, and we'll be watching your journey for sure. I can't wait to see what you get up to and lead us through into the future. It's going to be so exciting to have you there pushing for us and pushing for country and pushing for mobs. So thank you so much. Next up, we have the General Manager of Black Duck Foods, Chris Andrew. Oh, there he is. He's just popped up. I'll leave it over to you, Chris, to say who you are and what you've been up to.
Yeah, Warramie Ngani from Gadigal country, and for you and Mob Water. Black Duck Foods was started last November. Some of you might know one of the founders, Bruce Pascoe, wrote a book a couple of years ago, sold a few copies. And it was founded by Bruce and his son, Jack Pascoe, who's done a little bit of work in the fire side of things too. And Noel Butler, another pretty strong Ewan fella. And more recently on the board, we've got a Bundjalung woman by descent, but she spent a lot of time on Gadigal country, Jocelyn King, and two other board members. So we're a social enterprise that started out, and really ours is a food story, and it's about trying to reconnect with all the traditional agricultural processes that were in existence up until about 250 years ago, when everybody started denying that it existed. And I guess part of tonight is there's been a lot of talk about the where to from here with a bit of a fire story. So it's I guess something that I can probably offer is some insights and share a bit of a yarn about what our story is and how fire is part of that. And I think it's really important to understand from that traditional agricultural perspective, is, you know, historically food and country work together, and fire was part of that yarn, and it was a really important yarn. And over the last 250 years, colonisations sort of tried to create a food story that competes with the environment, and that's thrown up a whole lot of challenges to the landscape that Ollie talked about. And so traditional agriculture in a lot of ways is about going back to a food system that works with country, but works with people and works with culture. And it's that part of the program that brings it all together, because even we all know in our own different homes, you put some tucker on the table and you bring everybody together. So that food story is about bringing mob together. That food story is that story that starts talking about the country it comes from, and that food story about that, what you're eating. And it's really important to understand that, because telling those stories opens up the next story. You know, old aunt told a story about maybe they did a bit of a burn, because the landscape used to work with the food. Nowadays we have food systems that you chuck a whole lot of poison in the ground and they want us to all eat it. So it's about maybe revisiting that and using some of that traditional knowledge. Now, I reckon Ollie touched on a number of really good things, and I won't go down and follow up too many of those, but one of the things he talked about is solving problems. And I guess one of Black Duck Foods' key things is not only listening to the stories and trying to redo what elders did, but try and solve the problems of what those stories were, and how we need to reinvent those stories now. Because I'm probably talking to an audience that's living on country that has changed materially. You know, in days gone by, you could put a stick in the soil and it'd go down a metre. Nowadays, you're going in and putting a stick in and you're trying to push it through porcelain. So part of our focus at Black Duck Foods is really around the native grains and the tubers. And both of those sorts of foods had a real fire connection. There was a real fire story with the way that native grains were maintained. We all can see that things like kangaroo grass works better with other grasses if it's burnt on a regular basis. We can see it combine, the C3s, C4s come together and they cohabitate. And we could see that across country, that these biodiverse mixes of native grasses work well, and that mix of fire in that system help manage grass length and grass compatibility. And we also know that mobs would have walked across all those grasses spreading seeds. And the other thing we already know, and one of the things that Ollie touched on about the horrendous bushfires, fire was used to manage grassy woodland. Not 100 trees to the acre, but a lot less. And that food story is about incorporating food and trees and grasses, animals that used to tend that. And in there'd be the tuber story and women's business and those sorts of things. So Black Duck Foods is not only trying to redo what was done in the past, but looking at science and different techniques on how do we adapt that to what we got now. Because it is about a restoration, but it's more of a restoration, not just a country, but of culture and of people. And it's not about splitting it up, that there's a fire story over here and a food story there and another story over there. How do we bring these stories together and show people that it's not about splitting things up, it's actually about living with them all together? And so one of the important things in this is, and Ollie touched on as well, is this fire story. How do we turn that into a money story? And that's sort of part of this food part of business, is that we are working around the food business because First Nations people get less than 1% of the bush tucker revenue made in Australia. So that sort of level of inequality exists across most of other knowledges. So that fire story is a really important one, because there's probably a whole lot of people out there that say, I wouldn't mind stealing that story and I'll go use it for my own purposes. And it's just another stolen story. So the food story is about creating businesses that go back and benefit from food systems that were here. And those food systems are relying upon this management of country and culture. And it's really important to go back and start looking at what that means in the landscape. And if you're starting to put perennial grasses back in, if you're starting to put tubers in the right areas, and you're starting to put food back into country where it belongs and connect that country and that food back to people in that story, you're starting to manage and heal the landscape. And so, we're not the only solution. We are part of the many solutions that are going to happen. And we talk about there ain't no silver bullet in this area, but there's silver buckshot. And we're part of the buckshot and part about advocating how we do it. And we operate on Yuin country because that's the cultural license that we've been offered through Jack and Bruce and Noel to operate on that country. So ours is a food story that pertains to food opportunities and food that comes from Yuin country. But part of our story is that we go and have a yarn with all the other different mobs, whether it's Wiradjuri mob, who talk about being grain people. So they got a really strong grain story and we want to go talk to them. And it's about how do we create these First Nations food businesses that incorporate all these other aspects. And part of it is about reinvigorating things like the grain. And I actually said to Lee, I wouldn't show anything from a PowerPoint, but just to emphasize some of that story, I'm going to see if I can't pull up just a simple map. And
Hey, give me a sec. Give me a sec.
Cool. When you get a chance, I just want to bring up a map, and this talks about how you weave a fire story across the landscape, and how that fire story now connects into our food story. And this is not a map that that Bruce drew, but it's probably one that he used in the book, and one that might be a bit familiar. It's put together by a white fella, but it just goes to show how powerful what the food system was in this country. And hopefully you can all see that. That's the original grain belt. So this is the Tyndale Arc. And as you look at that, you're going, that's a bit of a drawing that captures about 30% of Australia's landmass. And most of the commentary from ethnobotanists and the like would say, you know what, that arc's probably about 40% of the landmass. It misses some of the country. That arc is all about just a grain story. So grasses, native grains, and that would have incorporated a whole grassy burn story. That's the connection between west of Australia to east coast going through all states and territories. That's what we had. So we had a landscape that was a foodscape. And it crossed the country interconnected, and mobs could trade and travel and eat along that. And that food story is a healthy food story, and it enabled mobs to be able to manage climate and climate change. And what we've done over the last 250 years is break that whole story up. So, and then if you weaved in the tuber story and the yam and the murnong and all that sort of stuff, it is a full story, but it all incorporates fire as part of it, because fire was important in managing the landscape and managing, you know, a grassy woodland and managing a food story. And there were things that were going on in terms of depositing carbon and then feeding that back into the soil. So in Australia, we've got the oldest soils, but we used to have some of the healthiest soils to grow all these products in. So Ollie's fire story is a really important one of getting carbon back into the soil. And it's one about when we get the carbon back in the soil and we start healing that soil, our ability to start growing perennials and native grasses again become easier and easier, because a lot of time and effort's gone into it, and it is a challenge. There's no doubt about it, because we're trying to grow native grasses into a soil that they don't recognise anymore. And so we've got a lot of work to do to heal that story, to bring back those grasses and compete with all the weeds, and then think about, this is not just a static system. This is a system that lives and provides a utility back to the people. These grains are as productive as wheat. You know, there's plenty of research out there. There's a whole series going on with the Sydney Uni mob up in Narrabri that we've been part of, and they're getting yield of native grasses around a quarter of what they get out of wheat. So that's pretty competitive, especially when you start doubling the protein you get from native grasses. And then you can get a couple yields out of them, and they use 10% of the water, and they're fire resistant, and they're drought resistant, and they sequester carbon in the soil. So they're really, really healthy things. And it's a way of saying, how do we bring Ollie's fire story into this country? How does that, and it connects that fire story to a food story. That food story and fire story connects to the cultural stories, the song lines, the healing of the people there, and the language, and hearing different story from different country. Noel always talks about, he learned a lot of story for Yuin country when he went away and heard old men talk about their story and remembered. He'd heard that, but as a boy and never connected. And it was then he was able to bring that back and bring that story back into his country. So I think there's a really big opportunity to pull all of this together for opportunities where it's just not a food story, or it's just not a fire story, it's a country story, and they all incorporate, and that country is what's going to look after people. It's what country is going to look after culture. And let's put the brakes on trying to take out little bits that might suit somebody's narrative and say, actually, no, it all comes as a whole package. If you can't bring the mob with you, you can't have the story. And start saying, actually, if you want this knowledge, you come into my cultural framework. It's no more does mob have to go in a white fella's cultural framework. Actually, you got to come into ours, and then we'll invite you to hear that yarn once we know you respect it, once we know that Indigenous cultural intellectual property is protected, once we know that the benefits of these stories don't get stolen. And I think, Ollie touched on a lot of those mobs up in West Arnhem with Walfer and now Alpha, and the power of some of that fire story and some of the power of that independence over being reliant on government is what they were able to do with some of the fire money is Watakan. The Watakan Rangers built a school to educate young people on country in language because they didn't like what the NT government school system was trying to do and were seeing sort of cracks in that. They went and set up their own system, and that fire money gave them that independence. And that's what this is about economic independence for First Nations people, getting that benefit from their own knowledge and then sharing that with broader Australia and bringing that whole respect. And in that, there is a payment for fire knowledge. There's a payment for cultural knowledge. There's a payment for working back on country. And the beauty about it, and I noticed somebody sort of said more dollars from government. Yeah, but that often comes with a real hook. So there's an opportunity for government to help overcome some of the barriers they created. But here's a sector, here's a story that actually starts giving some of that independence. So I reckon that's about as much as I could talk, because I am also mindful that you got 6 minutes to go before 8 o'clock. So happy to field any questions, but really appreciate the invitation to come on and have a bit of a yarn.
Thanks, Chris. I'm just reading something that you got on your website. It says, save the present with the Indigenous past. And I think that's a powerful statement you put there. And I resonate really strong with that. So, yeah, and thanks for your knowledge sharing. Very interesting. And I'm sure we were going to become great friends, and we're going to talk a lot. So it's been a pleasure to cross paths with you and and follow some of your journey. So thanks so much.
Well, the beauty about the border coming down in a couple of weeks' time is we got a farm just on the other side of the border, but most of our workers all come out of Eden, and Noel's a bit further up Milton Way. It's going to mean that we can start bringing people down on Yuin country, southern tip, and showcase a little bit of what we're doing. But it also means, Bruce and Jack can travel a little bit more. And, I've been fortunate sitting here on Gadigal country that I've been able to get out to all different places. But this story is going, and there's a lot of interest. And I get a message from, 20 people a day going, where can I get flour from native grain? And the response is, well, mate, we've got to wait till the grass grows, because we wiped an awful lot out. But the importance of these sorts of forums is people see the importance of that grain. It's just not a perennial grass that you can harvest. It's actually, it is food source. And for most people on country, they've just been letting it go. And it's one of those assets. So we're doing a lot of work to showcase the economic value of putting these grains back in.
Well said. And as a Yuin woman, I'm so excited to get involved and see what's going on down there with that yam project. Oh, that's gonna be some cool stuff coming out of there.
Man, you're gold for us. We got our hooks into you already. We're going to get that young Nathan Lygon's going to get his hooks right in and drag you into that project.
When's the border opening? When can we get down there?
We'll set that up in Eden, and that's where it's going to go.
Perfect. Yep.
Down on, and we're sort of thinking we've got a relationship with twofold there, because both Nathan, Terry, who works on the farm, and Bruce all sit on the board there. So there's a relationship, and some of the people might know of a fellow named Charlie Massey. He's written a couple books too. So Charlie has done a lot of good work on soil as well. And one of the things he's done around compaction of soil is free up some of his country, and it's all there ready for the Ewan's women to come out and share their story on that country with some of the Murnong that we have been, nurturing in the absence of the white-footed rabbit rat. Some of us men folk have been sort of pretending to be mammals and nurture that for the women to come along, and there'll be an opportunity to put that in Charlie's farm and see how it operates in that sort of landscape and bring Murnong back to the Monero. That probably hasn't been there since about 1840s when the sheep ate it all out. So, there's some really great opportunities to start connecting this up, and in that landscape, there's another sort of opportunity to see how that fire story works in with that. Yeah. But we're really keen on Bruce's farm to sort of have patches and go, how much of a difference do we need to do from what elders probably did in terms of that burn and changing some of those opportunities because the landscape. But even the horrendous nature of the bushfires over summer, what that did is wiped out a kangaroo grass crop that we thought we could harvest for some seed, but it also took out kikuyu, and we saw dancing grass come up, and we got a crop, and we've eaten bread, and it's made a beautiful flour, and we've been able to sell some of it, and it's been fantastic. So what the country took away with the fire, we were able to bring back and create something. So it's one of those benefits for us.
Yeah, wonderful. And I can see that there's a comment in there, people wanting more information. Chris, you shared with me this week a 3-part series, and you're speaking in session 3, a native grain knowledge. Are you able to share the link to that in case people want to jump on that?
I'll dig that out, and I will put, I'll see if I can find the link as we speak. Just a minute, and then put that in, because there was a Guardian article today or yesterday about the work Angela Patterson's doing. We're up in Narrabri around June doing some Johnny cakes with a whole lot of different grains, and that's a series been going on. So what I can do is see if I can find it, and it's an open series. Let me see if I can get that up. Just let me go on mute for a sec, and you don't hear that.
That's fine. And really important what you said there about country is boss, and that's been coming up every week, is that country tells us what needs to be done, not us. And when we're moving forward together, we need to remember that these are Aboriginal-led practices. And when Ollie, you said you apologise for not being able to do the work that you really wanted to do, it's not your fault that knowledge hasn't been handed down and there was that gap. And now we're playing catch up to try and build that knowledge back up within our mobs, that no one needs to apologise for that, not us for sure. So you're doing what you can, and we can only do what we can, and we can't rush things. We need to get it right. And also on ICIP, Terry Janke has True Tracks, a program going at the moment. If you want to learn more about protecting Indigenous knowledge, definitely jump onto Terry Janke and have a look at that. It's really important for agencies to get their head around that. And as we move forward, misappropriation of culture and knowledge is something that we are really wary of. And yeah, awesome. While we're waiting for Chris, does any of the other panelists have anything to say?
Yeah, so what about that working all right?
Yeah, you're good.
Yeah, cool. One of these, like, you know, we were talking about the theme or topic for this is like the future, you know, where to from now, and stewardship. So, you know, everyone's heard a lot from us over the last couple of weeks, but there's answers lie within all of us. You know, it's your story, your knowledge, your connection, but more importantly, you know, your stewardship and your approach. So, that's part. So we want to hear from you guys, and learn. You know, and so, you know, start the expression, and you know, and throw some questions at these guys while you've got them in front of you, and how we continue this story and build on this knowledge. And I've been writing, coming up with words of the week right through this whole series. And my first word was stewardship. Then we talked about advocacy. Then it was resilience, empowerment, and knowledge. And and today for me, like, it's unity. You know, that's my ending word for this. You know, we're all in it together. You know, we've got our knowledge system. We share it. We build it. You know, and we go and heal and we look after country. So I put it all together and I come up with my acronym, and my acronym is Chorico or something, if that's how you pronounce it. And I typed it into Google, and there's no definition for this word. So now it's up for us to create this definition. So, and that's how it evolved. And it was by coincidence how it happened. And I was quite amazed, you know, how what this webinar is sort of producing for me and shaping my journey. So, yeah, you know, so it's that stewardship approach, but, you know, and they working together. But, yeah, it's up to us, you know, we work together and create these answers. And that's going to be our definition, you know, for that word, Shiruku. And I might make a shirt, Shiruku, or the handle with some deli artwork. So, yeah, thanks everyone for joining in. You know, hopefully we can all catch up soon, and we need to keep this, you know, story going and these connections, and we'll do it somehow. Like, I'm sure people got emails and that there, and we'll put a link together and we'll keep the conversation going. And you know, we'll go and we'll do trips around country, and I'll be one of the first ones to hit down Malakuta and catch up with the guys down there, and learn about the grass now in Port Nayar, because we have grass story up here, but it's about rehydrating the landscape and retaining and putting soil moisture, you know, back in there. So, and it's all interrelated, you know, all those stories have synergy and connection, and that's what binds us, you know, that's the glue that keeps us together, and it keeps our country and us people and our communities healthy and as one. So, yeah, question time, like, yeah, these guys are here, and they don't like footy that much, so they'll hang around for a bit, and yeah, have some good questions for them. So for me personally, it's been a great experience, a great opportunity to sort of sit with a lot of people and learn in this space, and but also share that knowledge with, you know, our audiences and our friends, and now our stewards, you know, that are there sitting in these webinar series, and now and I see, you know, people advocating for us, and it's empowering for me when I see that, when got guys giving the answers to other people, educating them about Indigenous knowledge and what the stories are and how important it is to Indigenous people and to our community and our landscape. So from the bottom of my heart, just, yeah, I think everyone, you know, for this opportunity and for this message stick and this platform to be able to come together and share it. And won't be long, you know, we'll be all in person, you know, sharing these yarns, sitting under the tree, and yeah, watch the grass grow and the fire burn. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Uncle Nook, and thank you for bringing us along on your journey as well. Without you, this wouldn't have happened. You've been a real force, and you've been great working with the Ulladulla Land Council. You've really lit a fire under our butt to get moving with, you know, culture and cultural activities, and you've been there, you know, popping in each week to support, and I'm sure we're not the only one. You've been popping in everywhere just trying to reconnect, so well done to you. You've been amazing. And also Monica, you know, you are exactly what allyship is. You and Dean, you know, treading lightly. Without you guys, same thing. So thank you so much for holding this platform for us as well and making it run so well. And did we have any questions, Mon? Did you want to take the floor for the questions? Usually you do Q&A.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's not a lot of questions coming through, but a lot of comments, and you know, people are really grateful to have received these teachings from you and this knowledge. Yeah, I'll just read the one that's just come through from a lady by the name of Venus. Would love to catch up for more yarns about native medicines with you guys. I run community gatherings and work with natives. Do you guys have any recommendation or resources for growing more natives suitable for country, particularly that help reshape the original landscape? I'd love to support Aboriginal initiatives working with cultivation of native medicines and keeping culture safe. If anyone has any tips, please let me know. Lots of things like that coming through. You know, I think everybody's so hungry for this knowledge. We all know it's time. We all know that, you know, we can all feel it, literally feel it, even non-Indigenous people, that it's time for us to open our hearts and build some trust back from us non-Indigenous people to let, you know, I've just said to Leah earlier today, before this started, you know, just listening to some of the goings on for NAIDOC week this week through different platforms, I've just felt so proud. I really have. For the first time, I think, to call myself I'm a naturalised Australian. So, you know, to know that we have this magnificent culture here on country that's been here for over 65,000 years, and we're not celebrating it nowhere near enough. But to see this week, just a small amount of that coming through is just so inspiring. It makes me really proud and really happy for you guys, almost to the point where I'm feeling very emotional. And also listening to Chris speak about the grains, you know, I just can't see how we're not making, you know, this happen, and there's not more support for that. You know, talking about things like sequestering carbon and things like that on, you know, from native plants on our own country, which are here to actually be grown in these elements. You know, it's just insane that not more of this is happening. So I feel really grateful that you've trusted us at Treading Lightly to help deliver just a really small amount of the huge amounts of knowledge and messages that you have to get across. Yeah, and yeah, lots of people saying, yeah, we're really hungry. We're hungry for this information. And I know you have to give it at your, when you're ready to, and respectfully, we need to, you know, just sit back and be ready to listen when it's time. So thank you so much. I really am so grateful. And I'm really grateful to you, Dean, my offsider, because I wouldn't have a clue how to do any of this stuff. Probably wouldn't have happened without you, Dean. And I know there's been some hiccups along the way, so I do apologise for that. But yeah, we're all set up now, so we're ready for heaps more of this stuff.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we jumped straight in the deep end, and more than happy to have been a part of it, and, you know, just played my small part in spreading all this wisdom. So yeah, thank you all previous guests. And I've just put in the show links where to go, Treading Lightly, where we got replays to all previous episodes.
Oh, wonderful. And just touching really quickly, Mon, on what you said about identity, or maybe that's not what you meant, but that's what I was thinking about with your beautiful daughter Jade when she was doing her studies, and she asked some questions about what Australia's identity means, and Australian culture. And we are such a young, I remember saying our culture is so young when you take the Indigenous culture out of it. When you just look at the last 250 years, our culture doesn't really have a whole lot of meaning yet. I think we're still trying to work out what it is without traditional knowledge. But once we move forward, you know, and we start building Australia's identity using that knowledge as well, and including that in the way that we move forward, imagine what Australia's identity would look like if we just accepted and appreciated our past, our traditional past as well. And yeah, for such a young lady, she was right onto it, I tell you.
I think our kids really need that. I think they really, really need it. So, you know, I can't say it because I wasn't born in Australia, but she was born in Australia with, you know, various cultures in her background. But for her to be Australian, she really needs that. So
Yeah.
wonderful. And I think, yeah, a lot of people are feeling the same. So
Wonderful.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, I have to give a shout out actually, sorry, from a friend of mine, Kimmy from Texas. She's been watching all of these seminars from over there, and she messaged me this morning and she wanted me to pass on her sincere gratitude from over there, because everything they've been going through lately, it's quite horrific. And she lives in a little caravan with her dog, and she's actually been quite frightened a lot, but she's found a lot of peace and a lot of healing from all the way there in these webinars. So yeah, that makes me really proud. So to think that, you know, some of this Indigenous healing is spreading much further than we even imagine.
Definitely. Well, look at us. We're only 12 minutes over time tonight. That's awesome. All right, any final words? Chris has put up his link to his other webinar that he has going on. Yep, I could see that in there, so definitely check that out. That's a really important and interesting conversation. I'm definitely jumping on that one.
Yeah. I think to wrap it up and pick up a little bit about what Mon said. I mean, in this country, we should be aspiring to, you know, when you get to my age, you know, the grey nomads, we want to be driving around and having a loaf of bread in every country with a different food story and a different language made with different grains from that country. We could be eating 1,000 different loaves. And how beautiful would that be? That country can give us our food and our food story, just like they have in really the young cultures in Europe. We can be celebrating and probably putting on a few extra pounds, going around country eating traditional foods that have been around for 65,000 years. I mean, we've got to move from a deficit model to an asset model and celebrate. And these sorts of sessions that highlight just the power of the knowledge that resides in this country, it is that sort of knowledge is there to heal, you know, and build. And people want to know where to from here. There are so many economic opportunities, but it's got to be done fairly. It's got to be done equitably. And as enthusiastic as everybody is, we've got to make redress in terms of the inequity in the system, and that's got to be front of mind, you know. So let it be First Nations led, but then, you know, be part of that journey. Don't try and take the story for yourself yet. And this has been wonderful. Ollie and Lee and Noel and Mon and Dean, really appreciate being invited in.
Oh, thank you so much
for being here.
And you'll be really happy, Chris, to hear that today Treading Lightly helped to relocate a whole heap of joeys to Uncle Noel Butler's property. So,
Eat all these plants you got to land on Friday.
we're really excited. Auntie Trish sent me a photo while I've been on here, and it's really brought a tear to my eye to see those babies back on the property.
There's a couple visitors coming down too, so that is that's beautiful, and just goes to show how interconnected the whole world is. Everybody's got a shared story somewhere along the line.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear like some of Ollie's closing story, like, because he started the story with me, and I just love to get him to close if he's happy to do that, because there's some strong wisdom, you know, in the words that he has to say and deliver, and it'd be a fitting way for us to sort of move on. So, and I just love seeing him smile. So cool.
Can I just say, sorry, Ollie, before you finish, I should say, I didn't actually say thank you to Leanne and Uncle Nook. You know, like, I remember that conversation around the table up at the Lands Council, you know, when we were trying to put this together. Feels like it was only yesterday, but also a world away. And I'm just so grateful. It's been such a painless pleasure to have brought this together with you guys. It's just been amazing. Thank you.
More to come on.
Your turn, Ollie.
Okay. No, I don't even know what to say now. I might get started. I was gonna respond to just some of the stuff that particularly Chris was talking about in that, like thinking holistically and thinking about, like the relationship. And I really like that we're talking about this fire and food kind of dynamic. And that's one of the things that I think we just need to rethink the way that we manage these landscapes. Like we've sort of, I think as, like Western sort of society has slipped into this kind of attitude that we need to lock away the landscapes, and that's protecting them, and not understand that we need to be engaged in the landscapes. And so even to Venus's question before, like there's so much food in the landscape, there's so much resources in the landscape that are just not being accessed and nurtured. And we need to, I think, understand the risks around the exploitation of those resources. So it's sort of to what Chris was saying, like we need to support First Nations leadership in managing research and the livelihoods and the well-being that can come out of these relationships. So a good way of thinking about that is that, like culturally, we have a whole heap of protocols and law that says that you can and can't take certain things at certain times or certain species totems. An example of that is a totem for me is boogum. It's a black bean. It's a native rainforest species from these landscapes. I've done a bit of research work with some scientists around and cultural knowledge holders around it. And, it's like a big bean, and it sort of tends to be in riparian zones because its natural migration, seed dispersal is through the waterways. But interestingly, we find these seed source populations, that are higher than, the floods and higher than the streams. So they've been put there by the old people. They're and the genetics of these black bean populations in this north sort of northern rivers of New South Wales appears that the populations are not very old, in a sense that they're probably only 3,000 or 4,000, 5,000 years old. And they would most likely have come from North Queensland. And then we've got stories like Nothingalli, a story of Nothingalli moving through the landscape with these, beans falling out of the dilly bag. And then we have the Durgan story, which is a story of the Lady of the Water. Some people call her a witch, but it's a, spirit. And there's this, story where, her beans, need to be protected and looked after. And that, if you don't follow, there's a long story to it, but basically, a young fella eats the beans and gets sick. And so boogum black bean is actually noxious if you don't prepare it. It's like cycad or the burrowangs, so you've got to know how to prepare it. So there's all these different stories around, where things come from and where they go. And so there's a law story there around, you don't eat the black bean from the source where the, Durgan's places are, because that's where they are, they emerge from. But downstream, like you can eat them from there, if you know the law story about how to look after, how to eat, prepare them. So there's these layers, and we have the same thing with, like goanna, namal, and, like there's all these different stories that different animals and plants have, that means that there's places that they are protected, or at times they're protected. And so when we can rebuild those cultural frameworks that also are expressing the vibrancy of the stories of, so people are dancing, and singing and harvesting and feasting at the right times, in the right places, and they're telling people the stories of that place, we can harness so much more than food. We can harness these identities of relationships to country, and we can share them in a way, because it's so critical that we do that, because at the moment we're locking up resources and we're not looking after country. And you see that in the landscape. You see all these sick kangaroos that are all stuck on junk food, and you see, like think about the wattle seed that got burnt in these wildfires, tons and tons, millions of tons of wattle seed that we could be harvesting. There's all these really important medicines that, and we just don't have the systems in place, and we don't have the cultural laws in place that we once had to manage those resources. And I just hope that we understand that there's so much really powerful work that we can do that isn't only going to help us connect the country, but it's going to help shape the landscapes in a very productive way going forward if we can start to harness that knowledge. So it's been really beautiful, hearing these stories over, since I've started learning, and tonight being able to express and share them with each other and share and learn. I think the more we do this and the more we kind of activate country and activate each other, the stronger that will be, and I just want to take the opportunity to thank everyone again for, putting the series together, and all the supporters, and particularly Nook for encouraging me to come along. I was a bit apprehensive. I've been trying to take some time out because it's just, there's been so much going on, and everybody, has so much powerful work to do. And it's really great to be able to kind of connect in and share and be a part of it. And yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity to come along and share.
Well said, Ollie, and I love a good bedtime story. I could have next time I want to hear more about that.
Sorry, I was able to paraphrasing, yeah. But there's just so many, in-depth stories, that in the landscape, and they're best told in the landscape. And like what Chris was saying, I think it's not just people traveling around, hunting, the different sourdoughs of the, like in the local grains. It's the stories, and it's these really powerful connections that, and that's that livelihood story. So it's not just about the, getting our rangers out, managing fire. It's getting our custodians out on country, sharing and learning and reviving those, like walking the old pathways, camping the old camps, like being at that Bundanon fireworks shop, and hearing, I remember Jacob saying, this is the right place that we should be camping on country, and seeing fire in the landscape that hasn't been there for hundreds of years, and everyone gathering, you just, you see the power of connection, and you see, you feel the old people, you feel the country, and, and that's just an opportunity that we all have all the time, all over the landscapes. And that's what, the old people were doing. They were traveling a long way at times because they wanted to go and share and learn, and they want to connect, and we have that same story up to the Bunya Mountains, people would go up there, for Bunya Mountains complex, because it was a much bigger cultural landscape than it is now. People would go to their family's bunya trees that the local people would look after, and they'd feast and they'd gather. And there's just these really, beautiful stories and connections that, I've been so humbled to be a part of learning, and sharing. And I just know there's so much more out there. And anyone that thinks that our knowledge is gone and forgotten isn't living now, and won't be, thinking in the way that they should think about the future, because there's new stories and there's old stories, and they're coming together. And that's what happens. That's what being present is. It's the old and the new, coming together and then going forward. It's just such a powerful place to be, and we want everyone to be there, Anyway, I could go on and on and on, so I'll shut up now. But thanks, everyone. It's been a real pleasure.
Oh, thanks so much, Ollie. Oh, well, that's it, everybody. Awesome. Oh, we need another 6 series to keep going, but we're done. We're done for now. But hopefully we can get you, Ollie, and Chris, and all of our presenters back in one place now that COVID's lifting. Fingers crossed we can start getting together and having those face-to-face discussions and sharing knowledge. I can't wait.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to get down to that Ewan country. I'm really missing it, and I've spent some really good times down there. So thanks so much for hosting. But I should say as well, because you've just prompted me, that Firesticks is working on a seminar series as well, that will be launched in the coming days, weeks, or months. It's due soon. So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to write a bit of the journey that you guys have been on, and grow the audience and the connections. There'll be a whole heap of, you know, different community stories and different themes kind of weaving through, I guess, the Firesticks kind of alliance narrative. So that's something to look out for. We'll make a splash of it on our social media and our other communication pathways when it's ready to go. So yeah, more to come.
Wonderful. All right, Uncle Nook, you need to wrap up.
I just got to say, Walawani, yeah, safe journey, everyone.
Walawani.
Walawani.
Bye.
Walawani.
Alani.
Walawani, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. Just watch
Thank you.
because I'm sure there'll be more to come.
Very well.
And the Treading Lightly website too, and Firesticks. Walawani.
Thanks.
Tread lightly.
See ya. Bye.